Whole language learning was a disaster for reading education. Is phenomena-based learning doing the same to science? In elementary school, whole language learning was the preferred way to teach kids how to read. I actually had no phonics instruction. Instead, I sat in groups with other students looking at words and pictures in Dick and Jane books. Our teacher grouped us according to reading ability, with different positions corresponding to the cars on a train. Those in the engine were the top readers. Behind them were the pretty good readers in the multicolored cars. Down the line were the struggling readers in the caboose. I was a caboose reader. I hated being in the caboose, but honestly, reading mystified me. I was better with math and numbers, which is probably why I chose a career in the sciences when I got older. I finally did learn to read, and I love books so much that I started my own publishing company. But still, to this day, I occasionally have difficulty sounding out words and sometimes struggle to spell certain words correctly. So I wonder if learning to read would have been easier if my teachers hadn't been using the whole language method. This movement gained traction in the early 1970s, but it has roots as far back as the early 1920s with the introduction of progressive education. The philosophical theory behind progressive education is that learning should happen in a student-driven, student-centered way. While a former schoolteacher named John Dewey led the way for progressive education, some disagreed with its educational framework. People like Noah Webster and Horace Mann criticized the whole language learning approach. They felt that rather than asking students to recognize full words, students should be taught through the phonics system, which allows them to understand the relationship between letters and sounds. Throughout the 1900s, nobody could settle on what the best educational framework really was. In the 1960s, phonics was the norm. I grew up in the 1970s, and our schools, wanting to be progressive, adopted the whole language learning approach. And in the 1980s, the pendulum continued to swing toward whole language learning, where it remained the favored teaching method until recently. But the bubble burst on the whole language learning, and there are many articles that have been published recently claiming that whole language learning as a solo approach to teaching kids how to read just doesn't work. As it turns out, scientific research shows that students don't absorb the ability to read simply by looking at pictures and words. Instead, the data suggests that kids must be formally instructed on how letters fit together to make sounds. In other words, they also need to learn phonics. In the end, it's all about finding a balance. Whole language learning allows kids to practice reading rich and varied content that's interesting and engaging. Combined with the right amount of phonics instruction, whole language learning certainly can enhance a student's ability to learn to read, but isn't enough by itself. The lessons we learned from reading educational approaches can also be applied to teaching science. All the books, standards, and curricular programs in science education now focus on phenomena-based learning, a method based on the progressive educational strategy. But research shows that students need more than just observing phenomena and asking questions about them if we want them to understand what is happening in the world from a scientific perspective. To build a knowledge base, students must first learn the correct vocabulary for their observed phenomena, and students also need to have this vocabulary presented to them in the correct sequence and within the proper context. Otherwise, they won't have a solid foundation to add new terms and concepts to and yield a more profound understanding. It's no service to the student to show them the phenomena of adding two liquids together that bubble, fizz, or explode if they don't also know the terms atoms, molecules, and chemical reactions. Textbooks today, particularly in the elementary grades, confuse students by avoiding the correct terms or using generic words that don't make sense in high school or college. We need to learn from history and pay attention to the generations of students who struggle to read because of an educational fad. This fad eventually pushed out more effective methods of teaching students how to read, and we should be looking for the same solutions in science education. For this reason, I created RATATAZ, a done-for-you science classroom kit that sequences science topics for students to learn and understand science vocabulary. This sets them up for success in elementary school through high school level courses. To see if this kit fits your classroom needs, click here.